The room smelled of grease and wood smoke, and the particular quiet of men who eat without talking. Midday light came through the single window and lay flat across 3 tables and a counter and a handful of men who had seen enough of the world to register a new thing in it slowly. She stood at the counter. Tall. Very tall. The ceiling was low and she knew it without looking up. Broad through the shoulders, her hands open at her sides in the way that is meant to be read as harmless. She had come in without shoving the door and waited her turn at the counter without looking at the room. The man behind the counter looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided about. She asked for a plate of food. She said it plainly, without explanation or apology. Just asked. The man said no. She asked again. Once. Same register. No higher, no harder. He said something then that was not worth repeating. 2 men came out from the back. They put their hands on her, and she did not fight them, and she went through the door and into the street, and the door closed behind her, and the room settled back into its quiet, as if she had never been there. At the corner table, a man set down his cup. He had been there the whole time, sitting with half a meal in front of him, watching the way a man watches who has learned that watching is most of what there is to do. Not young, not old. He had a stillness about him, the kind that is not calm so much as it is the result of something that had been worn in over years. He did not move when the men took her out. He hadn't moved. He had watched. He sat a moment longer. Then he stood. He did not say anything to the room. He walked to the counter and said to the man there, 2 plates. He said it the same way she had asked. Plain. No argument in it. The man behind the counter started to say something. He looked at him. The man did not finish. Outside, she was standing at the edge of the street where they had left her. Not walking away. Not looking for trouble either. Just standing the way a person stands when they have run out of next steps. He came through the door and stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him and read him the way she had probably learned to read every person who came toward her, for what was underneath the gesture, for what it was going to cost. He said, "There's a seat." He turned and went back inside without waiting to see if she followed. She stood there a moment, long enough to be sure. Then she followed. He was at his table when she came in. He had set a second place across from him, just a plate and a fork, and he did not look up when the room looked at her. The room did look. Every man in it. Not one said a word. She sat down. The food came. They ate. When it was done, she left without a word, and he stayed to finish his drink, and the room went back to what it had been doing. It had happened. Before the year was out, both of their lives would look different than they had that afternoon. That part had already started. Before that morning, the day had been like most others. He was up before the light. That had been true for years, long before the war, and all the years after. The body learns its habits, and the habits outlast the reasons for them. And so he rose in the dark and went outside to see what needed doing. There was always something. The fence on the north side of the field had 3 sections that leaned. The barn roof shed shingles in the wind, and he replaced them one at a time, working from the east corner down. The field was his longest project, a plot of rocky ground that a harder man than him had given up on before he ever arrived. He had worked it for 4 years, and it was beginning to produce. The homestead looked like what it was. One man's work, accumulated. You could see it in the repairs that did not quite match, in the fence posts that held at different heights. It was the kind of place that took care of itself only if you did not stop. Not a careless place. A careful one. But careful the way a man is careful when he has no one to divide the work with. He had been a soldier once, not long ago as years go. He had gone to the war young and come back older than the years accounted for, and the space between those two things had changed him in ways he could not always locate. Some of it was the ordinary weight of what he had seen. Some of it was the weight of what he had come home to and what had not been there. He did not talk about the war, not to anyone in the settlement, not to himself at length. The shape of the loss was clear enough without being named. He knew what shelf it sat on, what it weighed. That was enough. On the wall above the table there was a shelf. On the shelf there was a tin plate. He had 2 plates. He ate off one. The other had been there since before he moved to this land, carried with him and set on every shelf in every place he had ever lived and never used. It was a plain thing, dented on one side, the kind of plate a person does not notice after a while, the way you stop noticing what you have decided not to move. He had not set a second place at a table in a long time, not since before the war. He had carried the plate with him through all of it and set it on every shelf and never once put food on it. He cooked for himself when he had to and did not bother when he didn't, and once or twice a week he rode into the settlement to eat at the eating house on the main road. Not because he needed the company. He went because there were things easier to keep doing than to stop, and sitting down to a plate of food among other people was one of them. That was why he was there that morning. That was how he had been sitting at the corner table when the door opened and an orc woman came in and asked for something to eat, and was told no, and taken outside by 2 men, and left in the street. He had sat with his hands flat on the table and watched all of it. Then he set down his cup and stood up. They ate and did not speak. The food was plain and there was enough of it, and neither of them said anything about any of it. The room watched them for a while and then went back to being a room. Men finished their meals and left. The man behind the counter found other things to do. By the time they were done, the place had mostly emptied out, and the light through the window had shifted from midday flat to the lower angle of early afternoon. She pushed back her plate. He pushed back his. They both got up at roughly the same time without it being a plan. Outside she stopped. Not because she had somewhere to be and was deciding which way. She stopped because she was thinking, and thinking was something she did with her feet still. He stopped too. She had a way of standing still that said she had done a lot of waiting in her life and had gotten very good at it. They stood in the street in the afternoon light while the settlement went about its business around them. She looked at him. Not the way she had looked at him inside when she was reading him for threat. Different from that. This was the look of someone who had accepted that a thing had happened and was now trying to understand the shape of it. She said, "What do you want for this?" Not a threat. A question. The careful kind, from someone who had learned a long time ago that gestures without conditions attached are usually just a longer story. He thought about it. Or he did not so much think as let the question sit, the way you let a question sit when the answer is simpler than the asking made it seem. He said, "Nothing." She waited. He said, "You sat down, you ate, you didn't cause trouble. That's what I asked for. That's what I got." She looked at him for a long time after that. He did not look away, and he did not add to what he had said. He had said the thing, and the thing stood on its own, and he was not going to explain it or shore it up with more words. He was not a man who used more words than a thing needed. She was still reading him. He let her read. Not filling a silence is a skill. He had learned it somewhere in the war, and it had served him better than most of what the war had left him with. The settlement moved around them. A cart went past on the road. Neither of them moved. Finally, she said, "What do you get out of it?" He said, "I told you." She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "It's the only one I have." She looked at him a while longer. Whatever she was looking for, she either found it or decided she was not going to find it this way. She said, "Where do you go now?" He said, "Home." Then he said, "I eat here most Tuesdays." He left after that. He walked back up the road without looking to see what she did. She was still in the street when he turned the corner. He did not see that, but he had been paying enough attention to know it. She had nowhere to go that night. He had not solved that, and he had not tried to. He had told her when he ate, and where. That was all he had offered. Whether that was useful to her was her business, not his. One person in this settlement had looked at her directly, not past her, not through her, at something else, while she happened to be standing there. At her. That was not how this day had begun. The next morning he was up before the light, the same as always, and the homestead had the same things waiting for him. He worked until mid-morning. Then he hitched the cart and rode into the settlement for the things he needed, flour and oil, and a new file for the saw, the ordinary errands of a working place. He saw her near the livery. She had found somewhere to sleep, or she had found something close enough to sleep to have gotten through the night. She was sitting on a crate in the shade of the livery wall, eating something she had come by somewhere, not looking at the street. She was not looking for him. She was managing. Just barely. But she was managing. He did not stop. He did not slow down and look at her the way some people look at a thing they are deciding about. He kept going past, got his flour and his oil and his file, and went home. It was a choice, leaving her alone like that. Not indifference. He had thought about it on the ride in, and again on the ride back. She had asked him nothing, and he had offered nothing further. If he went to her now, it would be a different kind of gesture than the plate, and he did not want to be in the business of explaining that yet. That evening he came in from the field and washed up at the pump and ate his meal standing at the counter, the way he often did when the day had run long and sitting down seemed like more of a decision than it was worth. Afterward, he stood in the kitchen with nothing particular to do. The tin plate was on its shelf. He looked at it. He did not move it. The second day, he came back into the settlement for the post and took the long way around through the market road. He saw her at the edge of the stalls, trying to buy something from one of the sellers. He watched from across the street. The seller shook his head. He said something short and final, the way men say things when they have made a decision and do not intend to discuss it. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice or step forward or do any of the things a person does when they feel they have a right to push. She just stood there a moment, the way she had stood in the street 2 days before, and then she turned and walked away without a word. He stood on the other side of the street and watched her go, and did not call out, and did not cross. He was not sure yet what his place in any of this was. He only knew that he had been sitting at the right table on Tuesday, and what that had come to, and that the 2 days since had been a different kind of thing entirely. Not nothing. Not yet something either. He had fixed fences in the rain when nothing forced him to. He had gotten up in the dark for longer than he could remember. He had done a lot of things without being sure of the reason until well after. He knew how to keep moving when he was not yet sure why. What he did and did not do in these 2 days would matter later. Not for what they were on their own, for the pattern they were part of. On the third day, He left before it was fully light. He had wrapped the food the night before, a cloth around bread and dried meat, and an apple, the things he had on hand, and tied it with a piece of cord. He set it by the door. He rode into the settlement in the dark, and left it on the crate outside the livery where he had seen her sitting. He did not knock on anything. He did not leave word. He left the bundle and rode home. She found it in the morning. He did not see that happen. He only knew that when he came back through the settlement the next day, the crate was empty and the cloth and cord were folded on top of it, the cord wound into a small coil. Folded, not dropped. That told him something about the kind of person she was. She did not come to find him to thank him. That was right, too. He had not left the food to be thanked for it. On the fourth day, toward late afternoon, he looked up from the field, and she was at the fence. Not at the gate. Not at the door. At the fence on the south side of the field, the section with 2 leaning posts and a loose rail. She was standing with her arms at her sides, looking at the land the way a person looks at land they are trying to read. She was looking at the right piece of fence, the piece with the work in it. Either that was luck, or she had been watching the property more carefully than he knew. He set down what he was carrying and walked over. They stood on either side of the fence for a moment. Not a standoff. Not a greeting, either. Something in between that didn't have a name. The kind of quiet that settles when neither person is going to say something, just to be the one who said something first. He looked at the leaning post nearest to her. He looked at it the way you look at a thing you have been putting off, and she followed where he looked. There were tools leaning against the far post. A hammer, a pry bar, a coil of new wire he had set there 3 days back and not gotten to. She looked at the tools. She looked at the post. She stepped through the lower fence rail and picked up the pry bar. He went around to the gate and let himself in from the other side. They worked without talking, which was the right way to work on a fence. She knew how to use a pry bar, and she knew how to set a post plumb, which told him something more. He drove the wire while she held, and when it was done, he moved to the next post, and she moved with him without being asked. Then the third, then a fourth. By the time the light went low, the section held. He gave the wire a last tug, and it didn't give. He said, "That's the one." She said nothing. She set the pry bar back against the post where she had taken it from. He went inside. She left. There was nothing else that needed to happen that evening. She knew where the property was now. She knew what kind of man was on it. Not a man who made things complicated. Not a man who needed a reason before he would let a thing be simple. That was worth knowing. On the 5th day, she came back before he had started work. No arrangement had been made for it. He had not asked her to return, and she had not said she would. He came out of the house in the early light, and she was standing at the edge of the field with her arms at her sides, waiting. He nodded. She nodded. They started work. There was a section of barn roof that needed 3 shingles replaced, and a stretch of fence on the east side of the field that had been listing since the spring thaw. They worked the roof first, the 2 of them up there in the morning, cool, while the light was still flat. She had done this kind of work before. He could tell by how she moved. She did not waste motion, and she did not wait to be shown where to put her hands. The work went quick. He showed her where the tools were kept. He did this without being asked. She was going to use them, and a person who uses tools needs to know where they live. He showed her the barn, the workshop cabinet, the box by the door. She took it in without comment. At noon, he went inside and made food for both of them. He set 2 plates on the table. One was the plate he always used. The other was the tin plate from the shelf above the table. He set it down because there were 2 people and 2 plates in the house. He did not make a ceremony of it. She came inside and sat down. She saw the plate. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they have understood but are not going to speak about yet. Then she ate. He ate. Neither of them said anything. The food was the same food he would have made for 1, stretched to 2, and it was enough. On the 6th day, a neighbor rode past on the road. He slowed his horse as he came even with the gate. He looked at the fence, straight and sound now, the posts holding, and then looked past it to where the orc was working on the far edge of the field, carrying timber. He stayed on his horse longer than a man stays when he is not thinking anything. Then he clicked his tongue and rode on without speaking. That evening the veteran sat down to supper without mentioning it. She sat across from him, and she did not mention it either. But he had seen her watching the road in the afternoon, and she had been watching the road since the 5th day, and she had seen the same thing he had. They ate. They did not talk about the neighbor or what the neighbor had decided to think about what he saw. On the 7th day, she was still there when it got dark. It was not planned. They had run late on the south fence, and then there was the matter of the barn door hinge that had needed attention for a week, and neither of them had gotten to it. By the time the hinge was right, the light was nearly gone. He went inside. She did not leave. He put more wood on the fire. She sat in the chair closest to it and did not move toward going. They were both tired. Neither of them was in a hurry to do anything about it. The tin plate was on the table where he had set it at noon, and not moved. In the firelight, it looked like what it was. A plain plate, dented on one side, set at a table in a house that had 2 people in it. It had been on a shelf for a long time. It was not on a shelf now. The fire had been down to coals for a while before either of them said anything that was not about the work. They were sitting on either side of it, not across the table. The chairs had drifted toward the fire when the cold came up in the room, and neither of them had moved them back. The light was low and reddish. Outside, the wind had come up while they were working on the hinge, and had not stopped. He was the one who said something first. He said, "When I came back from the war, there was 1 fewer person waiting than I had counted on." He said it the way a man says a fact, not to open a conversation, not to ask for anything, not to be pitied for it. Just as a thing that was in the room anyway, and had been there since long before she arrived, and it was less strange to say it now than to keep it unsaid for 1 more night. She did not ask what had happened or who. She looked at the coals. After a while she said, "I had a place once. It is not there anymore." She paused. "That is the short version," she said. He said, "That's enough." She nodded. It was. The fire made small sounds. The wind pressed against the house and did not stop. He thought about what she had said, or did not think about it, so much as let it settle the way things settle when you are not pressing them. A place she had. Gone. The short version. He understood the shape of short versions. His own short version was 1 fewer person. He had never given anyone more than that, had never been asked for more, and he was not going to ask her for more now. It was not trust they had built over the last 7 days. He had the word wrong. Trust was the fence work, the folded cord, the tools put back where they had been taken from. That was already there. What was in the room now was something different. Something that had to do with having carried a weight long enough that you had stopped noticing you were carrying it, and then noticing again for a moment because someone else in the room was carrying one too. Not the same weight, just the same kind of carrying, Neither of them was going to put theirs down. That was not what this was. It was just the acknowledgement that there was something there, and that the other person had seen it, and that neither of them was going to look away from it, or past it, or pretend it was something else. He did not say any of that. He was not sure he could have. It was not the kind of thing that fit into short sentences, and he was not made for long ones. The wind hit the house again. The coals went a shade lower. At some point, he looked at the table, at the tin plate sitting where he had set it at noon and not moved. He looked at it for a moment. He did not say anything. She was watching. She had been watching him the way she watched everything, with a particular steadiness. She saw where he looked. She did not ask about the plate. She did not say anything at all. But she had seen it, and he knew she had seen it. And that was the thing. Not the plate itself, not what he would have said about it if she had asked, but that she had seen where he looked, and had not needed to be told anything more. He had set it at the table today, because there were 2 people in the house. That was true. Underneath it was another thing, older and quieter, that had to do with who was not here. Both were true at the same time. The absence the plate marked was in the room now the same as hers was. Not explained. Not put down. Just present. The coals went redder and lower. The wind kept up. Neither of them moved toward going. 3 weeks after the night they did not leave the fire. She was still there. She worked the land every day now. She had moved what she had into the barn, which was not much, a bag and a bedroll, and what she had come with, and she slept there without asking, and he had not told her otherwise. It was her choice to make. She had made it. The settlement was talking. He did not know all of what was being said. He did not need to. He could read it in the way certain men looked past him when he came in for supplies, in the particular quality of silence that settled when he walked into the feed store. The neighbor who had slowed his horse on the road had talked to someone, that someone had talked to others. He had not heard it directly. That was the point. A thing like this didn't get said directly. Not yet. It moved through the settlement the way cold moves through a wall, steady and out of sight. Nobody had come to his door yet. On a Thursday, someone did. He was at the near fence when the man rode up. He rode alone and had the look of someone who had dressed with some thought for this call. Not formal, but considered. He got down from his horse at the gate the way a man gets down when he intends to be invited in. The veteran walked over. The man said his name and said he was from the land office. He said he had just been in the area and thought he might stop by. He said he had heard that the veteran had taken on some help with the land, and that was fine. That was entirely his business. But he wanted to be sure the veteran was aware that some of the other settlers had expressed concern, and that he was only mentioning it in case it was useful to know. The veteran listened to all of it without his face changing. He said, "She works my land. She earns what she gets. If there is a law she has broken, or that he has broken, he would like to hear it." The man said there was no law, as such. He said it was more a question of community relations. The veteran said he was listening for the law. The man didn't have one. He said what he had come to say had been said, and he would leave it at that. He got back on his horse. He rode out the same way he had come in. The veteran watched him go, then went back to the fence. That evening he told her about it. He did not leave out anything or soften any of it. He told her the man's name, what he had said about community relations and concerned settlers, and that there was no law the man could point to. He told her what he had said back. She said, "I know." She said, "I have been watching the road since the 5th day." He said, "I know." She looked at him. He looked at the field, the way it lay in the evening light. He said, "It won't stop there." She said, "No." Neither of them said anything after that for a while. There was not much to add. They had both known it was coming. She had known since the 5th day. He had known since the neighbor slowed on the road. The visit had not surprised either of them. It had only made the shape of what was coming a little clearer, and neither of them had needed clarity to know which direction they were already walking. The establishment owner came to the property on a Wednesday morning. The summer was still deciding what it wanted to be, and the air had the cool of early day in it, the kind that would not last. He came with a paper. It was folded, and he carried it in one hand, as if the weight of it meant something, which it did not. The veteran could see from 10 feet away that it was not an official document. It was a letter, written out in a careful hand on good paper. The kind of thing a man writes when he wants the appearance of authority without the standing to claim it. He stopped at the gate and called out. The veteran came over. The man said he remembered the veteran from the eating house. He said they had never spoken directly, but he wanted to remedy that, neighbor to neighbor. He said the orc had been removed from his premises with cause, and that her continued presence in the settlement, and particularly on a working property, reflected poorly on anyone who chose to associate with her. He said the veteran standing in the community would suffer for it. He said all of this as if he were doing the veteran a service. The veteran looked at the paper in the man's hand. He said, "What cause?" The man said it was self-evident. He said the establishment had every right to refuse service to anyone who posed a risk to the peace of the room. The veteran said, "Which law gives you that right?" The man started to answer and stopped. He shifted his ground. He said the law was not the point. He said the point was the community, and what the community could sustain, and the veteran was putting a strain on that by continuing down this road. The veteran said, "What standing do you have to speak for the settlement?" The man looked at him. He had not expected that question, or the one before it. He had come with a speech prepared, and the speech had assumed a different kind of listener. He adjusted. He said that reasonable men could see what was happening here, and that reasonable men would draw the right conclusion. He said he hoped the veteran would think about what he had said. From behind the veteran, near the barn, she had come out. She had not hidden when the man rode up, and she was not hiding now. She was standing in the yard with her arms at her sides, watching. The establishment owner looked past the veteran and saw her. She looked back at him. Neither of them moved. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in his establishment, behind the counter, before he told her no. She looked back at him the way she had looked at everything in this settlement. Still, direct, with nothing to prove and nowhere to put it. The veteran said he had heard him out. The man could go now. The man looked at her once more. Then he put the paper back in his coat, turned his horse, and left. The veteran watched him ride out and did not move until the road was empty. She came up beside him. They stood there a moment, looking at the gate. He did not say what they were both thinking, which was that the man wouldn't go home and be finished with it. He would go somewhere else next. That was what men like that did when they ran out of ground. They found someone else to try. She looked at the veteran. He looked back. There was nothing that needed to be said about it. They came on a Monday in the afternoon. Not 2 men. 5, maybe 6. The veteran heard the sound of them on the road before he saw them. The particular sound of more horses than one person has reason to ride. He set down the post he had been carrying and turned. They stopped at the gate. The man at the front was not the establishment owner. He was someone the veteran recognized from the settlement's more formal occasions. the kind of man who believed the settlement was a thing that needed defending, and that he was one of the people meant to defend it. He had the posture of a man who had made a decision and was here to deliver it. The other men spread loosely behind him, not in a line, not in formation, just far enough apart that the gate looked narrower than it was. The man said, "The orc goes." He did not say good morning. He did not ask. He said it the way a man says something that is already decided, that only needs to be communicated. He said they had all agreed. He said the settlement had come to a decision about what it could and couldn't accommodate, and this was that decision. He said the veteran was a decent man, and that was exactly why they had come to him directly, instead of going another way. He said there was no version of this in which she stays. The veteran set down what he had in his hands. He did not speak. Behind him, the barn door opened. She did not run. She walked out steadily, the way she walked when she was crossing the field or carrying timber, with her arms loose at her sides and her eyes forward. She did not look at the veteran to see if it was right. She walked until she was standing a few feet to his left, and she stopped there. She was taller than all of them, by enough that it was simply a fact about the situation. Not a gesture, not a threat. A fact. She looked at the men at the gate the way she had looked at everything in this settlement, directly, without a word and without flinching. The veteran still had not spoken. Then, at the edge of the property near the south fence, a figure appeared. The neighbor who had ridden past and slowed on the road and ridden on. He had come back on foot this time. He stopped at the fence line and stood there without speaking. Nobody said anything for a moment. The man on the horse looked at the veteran. He looked at the orc standing beside him. He looked at the neighbor at the fence. He did a kind of counting that had nothing to do with numbers. He was counting what each person standing there said about what ground the veteran held in this community and who had decided to stand on it with him. He had expected to find one man alone on his land, without anyone. He had not expected this. He said, "We'll be back." He said it the way a man says the last thing he intended to say, the one that is meant to leave the door open for what follows. Then he turned his horse. The men behind him turned theirs. They rode out the way they had come. The veteran watched them go. When they were clear of the road, he looked at the neighbor at the fence. The man gave a short nod. No words. He turned and walked back the way he had come. The veteran looked at the orc. She was watching the bend in the road. She said, "How long before they come back?" He said, "Not long." She nodded. They both knew what not long meant, and what needed doing before it came. They came back on a Friday, with more men. More than the first time. The veteran counted 8 as they came up the road, and there may have been more behind where the road bent. The antagonist was at the front again. He had spent the days between building something. You could see it in the way the men behind him rode, close and organized, like men who had been told what they were coming to do. The veteran was at the fence when they came into sight. He had been working the gate latch, and he heard them before he saw them and set his tools down. He did not go out to meet them. He did not go back to the house. He stood at the fence and waited. The orc was beside him. She had come up from the field when she heard the horses. She had stopped next to him without speaking, and without looking at him to see if it was right. She was still, not braced, not coiled. Still. The kind of still that is not the absence of something, but the presence of it. The neighbor was there, near the corner post. He had come around the side of the property, and had not announced himself. And there were 2 others, men the veteran knew by sight from the settlement, men who had been watching this for weeks, and had made some quiet determination about what side of this they were on. They were placed along the fence line. None of them clustered. They were just there. The antagonist came to the gate. He did not dismount. He said, "The orc is to be out of this settlement by sundown tomorrow." He said if she was not, there would be consequences he would specify when the time came. He said the settlement had reached the end of its patience and was prepared to act on that. He said it the way a man says a thing he has prepared. The veteran looked at him. He said, "She works his land. She earns what she gets. No law has been named that she has broken." If this man had found one in the days since his last visit, he was listening. Nobody on the veteran's side moved. Not the orc, not the neighbor, not the two men along the fence. No one shifted weight or looked to see what the others were doing. The antagonist looked at the veteran. He looked at the orc beside him. He looked at the others along the fence. Then he looked more carefully. Not at the numbers. He had come with numbers. What he was looking at now was something else. He was looking at the orc and what had to be occurring to him. She was not standing where she had stood the morning she was thrown out of the eating house. She was not alone on a street in a settlement that would keep walking past her. She was standing on a man's land, beside a man with years of standing in this community, in front of people who had come of their own choice and placed themselves along his fence. The ground was not the same ground. His force had worked the first time because she had had none of this. She had been alone, without resources, without anyone. That was not what she had now. He could see it from where he sat, and whatever calculation he had come here expecting to make, this was not the ground he had expected to make it on. Something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, the recognition of different terrain. He said, "This isn't finished." He turned his horse. The men behind him turned theirs. They rode out the way they had come. The veteran stood at the fence and watched them go. He did not move until the road had been empty long enough that it was not going to change. When it was clear, the neighbor came up beside him. He said, "You think he means it?" The veteran said, "Yes." The neighbor said, "So do I." He said, "We'll be here." He walked off. The two men along the fence went their ways without much said. The veteran looked at the orc. She was watching the bend in the road where they had gone. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The ground had changed, and they both knew what it had changed into and what it would take to hold it, and neither of them had any question about whether they were going to. Spring came late that year and arrived all at once, the way it sometimes does in that country, and by the time the world had caught up with itself, the field was already running. Two people's work looked different from one person's work. He had known it in theory. He had not quite known it until he stood at the edge of the field in the morning light and saw the rows go straight past the point where they used to bend. Past the stones he had been working around for 3 years, straight because there had been 2 sets of hands to clear them. The fence on the far side had held through the winter and was still holding. The barn roof had not shed a shingle in months. The place looked like itself, but more so, the way a thing looks when it has finally been given the attention it always needed. In the mornings, he set 2 plates on the table. He did this the way he did everything that had become ordinary, without much thought, the way you set down something that has a place and goes in it. One morning he set the tin plate down, and then stood there for a moment with his hand still on it. He looked at it the way you look at a thing that used to mean one thing and now means another. He did not say anything about it. He put the food on it and called out that it was ready. She was already up. He could hear her outside, starting the first task of the day. She came in when she heard him. They ate. The morning went the way mornings went. What they had built did not have a clean name. Not family, exactly. The word was the right shape, but not quite the right size for what they were. Not employer and hired hand, either. That had never been true, and both of them had known it. Something assembled from what was available, from what each of them had come to this with after everything that had not worked out. Fitted together the way you fit boards when you do not have matching lumber. Not pretty. Solid. It held. That was the thing that mattered. The grief was still there. He had not stopped carrying it, and he did not expect to. Grief does not go away because something new has been placed beside it. But it had a different weight now. The tin plate on the table was the same plain plate it had always been, dented on one side, the kind of thing you keep because you do not want to put it down. He had not put it down. He had just found something to put on it. Outside, the field ran straight. Somewhere on the road that ran past the settlement, there were others traveling. He did not know this for a fact, but the world beyond the fence had not finished moving. There were always people on roads, carrying what they had left of whatever they had started with, looking for a place that would not turn them out before they had eaten. Not all of them would find one. The road went past his gate. He went outside. She was at the far end of the field, already working. He could tell by the sound of it where she was without looking. He picked up his tools and started at the near end, and the morning took them both the way mornings do, when there is enough work and two people to do it. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much.